Okay, so we are reading the first text for the very last entry, but the last text we're going to read in class for the reading and theory notebook. It's called Proposing a New Research Method, Convivencia, Testimonial by Jessica M. Quintero and Cindy Peña, right? This is their affiliations. And we have the abstract first. All right, so everyone has their notebooks open, they're ready to take notes. They either have this on their computer or you're just following along with the screen. Abstract, right? So we read the abstract to get an idea of what is in the text. Convivencia testimonial is a subaltern, a word we should know, a subaltern method for conducting research among Chicana and Latina researchers / Latina researchers and participants. Its underpinnings are grounded in Chicana feminist epistemology, CFE. CFE offers an alternative way of doing critical, qualitative research, right? So we know what critical is and some critical thinking and critical thought. We've been talking about that. Qualitative, right? If we know a little bit about science, quantitative is things you can number, numerate, right? Somehow measure with metrics. And then qualitative are methods or aspects of research or aspects of something you're investigating that you have to describe, right? So description versus metrics. Qualitative is the descriptive. Doing critical qualitative research. Methodologies stemming from CFE, right? So Chicana feminist epistemology. So this sort of idea, this school of thought in academics, can also offer innovative methods grounded in subaltern epistemes, right? And we looked up epistemology last time, which is sort of how you structure, how you do knowledge, how you organize it, your beliefs about it, but sort of organization of knowledge. So methodology stemming from CFE can also offer innovative methods grounded in subaltern epistemes, right? Subaltern ways of knowing for adult educational research, right? And so this is their field. Adult educational research is a way that you can use and apply the methodologies that come from this kind of building of knowledge. All right, and so they're proposing a method for conducting research, and this is what it's called. And that's what the title of the paper is. We have our keywords here, right? Keywords will be helpful to sort of keep an eye on as you do your research. And let's begin here. Convivencia testimonial, CVT, is an innovative method produced to conduct research with underpinnings in Chicana Latina feminist epistemology. It is a critical research tool that can describe, collect, and identify valuable indigenous knowledge, such that it decolonizes traditional methodologies, right? So ways of doing research, methods, just ways that we've decided to do it because we think that that's the best way in sort of academia. So they're saying, how do we decolonize the traditional methodologies, right? Let's try new tools, new way of researching, new way of building knowledge, new way of collecting information. And so that's what they're proposing here. Something that will describe, collect, and identify valuable knowledge. Convivencia Testimonial, or CVT, provides Chicanas Latinas in the field of adult education some key concepts and possible benefits when a subaltern methodology is used. Okay, so you get some different concepts and some benefits if you use a different kind of methodology, different kind of way of doing research or building knowledge. For example, when we as Chicana Latina researchers embrace our own subjectivity, right, our own way of looking at the world, and challenge hegemonic traditional methodologies. We already learned what a hegemonic is, right? Sort of the like main cultural force, and challenge the mainstream cultural force, the traditional way of doing things, methodologies. We can embody, empower, and voice ourselves. So that's the benefit. Background, right? As we're reading this, also go pay attention to the subheadings because this is sort of like presented as research paper, and look at all the subheadings and how the information is split up. Give me 1 second, I'm going to be right back. Okay, background. The proposal of this unique research method we coined, Convivencia Testimonial, CVT, was created out of, right, why did they make it? A need for proper tools that could represent Chicanas and Latinas as researchers, doctoral students, scholar activists, and participants in adult education research studies. Okay, so they have named what their field is, right? This adult research studies. So you're researching adult education. And how do we do it, or how do we make it better? By proposing this methodology. It was crafted to offer a subaltern method, right? Subaltern, those voices that don't have access to power, a subaltern method that challenges and resists androcentric Western traditional education research by, what's it doing by using this new method? Decolonizing how Chicana Latina's knowledge is justified and validated. Okay, so this is how it actually does it, by how knowledge is justified and validated. And then I don't know what this word means, androcentric, so let's look it up. Paste, hello. There we go. Focused and centered on man. Okay, so male-centered. Resist male-centered Western traditional educational research by doing what? Decolonizing how Chicano Latina knowledge is justified and validated. The goal of this method is to disrupt the traditional instruments of educational research. Our goal is also to embed theoretical concepts such as Chicano feminist epistemology and testimonios that are umbrellaed under critical race theory, right? So these things exist when you look at critical race theory and Latino critical theory, right? So all of these things include something we've been talking a lot about, right? So you guys already know half of this is testimonial as a genre. Key terms and definitions can be found in table 1. So let's look at this chart. This might be very helpful when you guys are writing about what testimonial is as a genre. So looking at some definitions, you can quote these using these definitions. So let me finish reading and then we'll look at the table. Chicana feminist epistemology, CFE, in adult educational research is a conceptual framework that allowed us to question and innovate methods that were designed to decolonize methodologies. Okay, so it's a framework, how you do things in order to what? To design new ways of doing research in order to decolonize how we do it now. A Chicana researcher must find the right tools and concepts that fit your needs and goals. The experiences that we as Chicanas have lived cannot compare nor be shared by an androcentric ideology of social research, right? So if you're doing social research and you're using methods that were made by and for mainly males of a Western tradition, mainly white or of that tradition, then it's not going to capture all of the knowledge of completely different contexts. So you have to innovate, add to, change how you do that research in order to really get the good knowledge, basically. Social research. With a Chicana feminist consciousness, we can claim our identity as Mexican American or second-generation immigrant women. We can choose to research through a Chicana perspective to produce previously ignored her stories and validate subjective knowledge. Okay, so different things that you can do if you use this new method. Because we as Chicana Latinas were not written into the traditional structure of research methodologies, we were and still are the women of color colonized and researched through continued marginalization and dehumanization, right? And again, referencing the whole idea of subaltern, of who has and doesn't have access to power. So we have some definitions here. Let's look. Vivencias, what we experience as lived realities, okay? So our lived realities. Convivencia, coexistence, transcends the objective self-other divide and promotes trans-border praxis. Let's see if they'll define those words a little bit more further. Autohertorias, concepts that Chicanas, Latinas, and women of color embed their writing with abstract ideas and personal history, as well as the history of their community, right? So I don't know if that sounds similar, but to me that sounds similar as some of the goals of testimonial. Subaltern, we should know this one, but we can look at the definition again. A concept rooted in issues of oppression, marginalization, and political concern that resists the hegemonic ideologies to create an alternative reality for marginalized groups, and very much having to do with marginalized groups that do not have access to power. Deconstructs, decolonization, we definitely looked at this before, deconstructs traditional Western research by humanizing Indigenous people, and very much focused on undoing oppressive systems of power. Testimonial, you guys should know very well. Methodology or method that supports marginalized individuals, usually silenced in mainstream stories, to bring forth their witness testimonies and create counter narratives. All right. Therefore, so let's look at the paragraph before because we interrupted this with a table. Okay, some of the good things that happen or some of the benefits of using this kind of methodology and why we need them, right? Therefore, Testimonios as a method was born to resist the stereotypical narratives depicting Chicanos. I'm going to say just the sort of male term to not have to slash it, but Chicanes is also another way to do it. Chicanos, Latinos, as second-class citizens in the United States. Yet Testimonios in CFE, right, Chicana feminist epistemology, can be utilized as a methodology. And as such, for the purpose of our proposal method, right? So we are proposing a new method, and in order to introduce this new method to you, we have to sort of introduce where it comes from, which is this area of study, right? That comes from this place. But what they're proposing is a method of how to do research in social science. We defined it as both. Okay. As a methodology, its framework guided our creation of CVT because it allows for the researcher and participants to co-construct knowledge instead of only the researcher holding the power of producer. So this very important key, I would say this is probably the first big definition of it. Excuse me. Co-construct knowledge. So as a methodology, Convivencia Testimonial is a framework guided in our creation. As a methodology, its framework guided our creation of CVT because it allows for the researcher and the participants to co-construct knowledge. So to bring knowledge, right, to create new knowledge, how we know things, we take it right from somewhere, we encode it in some way, and we reproduce it, and we sort of spread it, right? And to do that in cooperation with the people, right? It's social sciences with who you are studying or who you are taking this knowledge for, right? So co-creating instead of one person interviewing or taking that knowledge and then reproducing it in their way. It is together, we are building a definition for it. We're building it as knowledge, encoding it together and transmitting it the way you would together. And participants co-construct knowledge instead of only the researcher holding the power of producer. It employs testimonios as a method to bring oppressive themes from participants' lived experiences to the surface, right? So again, as a method, it is trying to bring out this oppressive themes, trying to look at the oppressive themes. Part of the whole point of post-colonialism or decolonial academic thought is sort of like, let's study oppression in order to understand it. So we are trying to look for the oppressive themes of participants' actual lived lives, right? Their life testimony, a lived experience to the surface, and features firsthand knowledge of their life histories and struggles, right? So the first person perspective and not just the second of like looking on or studying or interviewing. It is actually trying to bring out the knowledge from the individual. As Chicana Latina researchers, we engaged other elements to deconstruct traditional focus groups and considered how participants form bonds or comfort each other when speaking on vulnerable topics. Okay, so a little bit of how the actual method works now, right? So we begin with where it comes from, sort of area of knowledge, the reasons it was created, the benefits of it, and then we start describing it a little bit more, describing some definitions, and now we get into what it actually looks like. So deconstruct traditional focus groups, okay? Considering how people form bonds or comfort each other when speaking on vulnerable topics, right? Because if you're trying to pull out stories of oppression, you have to consider that in this kind of thought, in this kind of school of thought. Convivencia added the extra oomph or sazon, seasoning, that is needed in communal space. Author Ruth Trinidad Galvan explained, vivencias are our everyday life encounters, our realities. Therefore, we are in our right to create teorías that conceptualizes our ideologies, life histories, experience, and relationships, right? So everyday life encounters and bringing them into mode of knowing, a mode of being, and coding them, writing them down, or taking them in some form, right? Doesn't matter how you're encoding them. That conceptualizes our ideologies, life histories, experiences, and relationships. Her concept of convivencia led us to decolonize focus groups and thus emerged a new method. Okay, so they're very specifically pointing out focus groups. So a way that you do scientific research already, the existing methodology is focus groups, and they work in a certain way. And they're saying, how can we rethink that way, rethink how we take stories from people or how we ask for stories from people. And instead of trying to just take them or create them as researchers, we're trying to introduce a new method that allows people to co-construct knowledge, to with us create their own narratives, right? Having it be a collaboration and not just a exchange. So that's the focus groups are what they're trying to decolonize, what they're trying to change, or what they're trying to replace with this new method of convivencia testimonial, focusing on lived experiences and testimonials, right? So kind of combining that. And thus emerged a new method, this one. See figure 1, convivencia testimonial framework for an additional visual explanation of a conceptual framework. So this one we already went over it, but if we look at just the key terms, right? Everyday life experiences, co-life experiences, theories or ideas that you come to based off your own understanding and your own lived experiences. Subaltern, focusing on the kinds of stories, the kinds of people, the kinds of narratives that don't have usually access to power, and then trying to decolonize, trying to undo those systems of harm that are left behind, and using testimonial, using this idea of the testimony of a person in their own life as part of a community, right? So all those things come together. Here we go. And here is a more theoretical framework, map, chart, visualizer, right? So here's sort of like the tradition, the school of thought, as I've been saying. This is sort of what it is, what kind of thing it is. It's a way of sort of like framing or conceptualizing knowledge. And then out of this is born this, or this testimonial, the genre fits into this kind of knowledge building, right? And from this, we have a methodology of co-constructing knowledge, right? In collaboration, right? Someone being interviewed about their life and they're building the sort of story along with being interviewed. Use testimonial to have counter narratives. The methods, right? You're proposing a new methodology are these two, both testimonial and convivencia, right? And so this turns into its new method, right? So here we have the testimonial, that's sort of the thing we've been most focusing on. But if we put in the kind of school of thought that focuses on it, and they highlight this other idea of convivencia, of having to coexist or co-create together, that turns into a new methodology that is replacing focus groups or replacing the function of focus groups, right? Convivencia testimonial. So that's a new method. Methodology. We propose a subaltern innovative method in adult education research coined Convivencia Testimonial. We used Ruth Trinidad Galvan's definition of convivencia in our concept and define it as a group of people that are coexisting, right? We might want to note that down for our definition. A group of people that are coexisting. This tool can be used in testimonials, an ingenious methodology that creates counter narratives by first-hand witnesses of oppressive accounts. Jot that down. You can definitely use that when you're explaining what testimonial is. Our methodological tool of convivencia testimonial, therefore, will involve the social gathering of participants that previously shared a communal space, ESL classroom, work environment, or etc. The underpinnings of this methodological tool stem from Chicana feminist epistemology. Hard word to say. Chicana feminist epistemology is a theoretical paradigm, right? So a way of thinking, of theorizing, that conceptualizes the unique experiences of Chicana Latinas through an intersectional feminist lens, right? Here's their sources. It creates an episteme that attempts to create critical research inclusive to Indigenous, marginalized, and gendered groups. Its historical significance derived from Chicana Latina feminists who fought to create their own feminist movement independent from the US American movement of the 1960s. In the present time, new subaltern methods are needed. Okay, so why are they needed? This is important because adult education is lacking the methodological tools for its growing ethnic population. Right? So saying there's a lot of reasons, right, to be able to tell your own stories, to take back power, to construct your own knowledge, to enforce all your own aims. But another reason is that they're needed, right? So this field that we're in, that they're writing as part of this field of adult education and research into that is lacking ways of dealing with studying or having knowledge or trying to gather knowledge from a growing ethnic population. And this is one way that they're proposing to deal with that, is to come up with different ways of capturing or collecting or encoding knowledge. Consequently, Convivencia Testimonial was born to create a communal space of shared racialized class and gendered experiences through a vulnerable sisterhood or hermandad, so siblinghood, where themes can innately appear and collectively bring attention to social injustices. Okay, so if you have, a testimonial, convivencia testimonial, so like a coexistence that has some amount of testimony to it, right? And that we understand it as a genre. And in order to create a bond, sort of like sibling and or just like coexisting bond that leads to some vulnerability, where you can have the themes of social injustices appear sort of more organically. Participants are encouraged to share in food and drink and congregate before, during, and after the research topic is discussed. Questions may guide, but do not structure the meeting. The researcher is also encouraged to share their own answers to be part of the collective as a co-creator of knowledge. See Figure 2, decolonizing methodologies for additional visual information about the hybridization of convivencia and testimonio to produce CVT. So here we have the method. So we have this convivencia, which they've already cited their sources, right? It's an idea that someone else came up with or someone else talked about that they re-explain and say, we're going to use this. So this is this circle here. It allows for bonding, creating rapport. It's done through a focus group, a shared meal, more bonding experiences, and sort of a typical, you get paid to come in, you don't know anybody else. It's very depersonal, you're answering questions, and a lot of personal sharing, right? How a focus group works. And instead you're doing these things. You're allowing for bonding, for creating rapport. You have, you share a meal, you hang out, or you coexist, right? Before, during, and after. And the researcher positionality, right? So the researcher isn't just like behind and like not saying anything, completely blank, just listing off questions. They're actually participating in a conversation. Then we have testimonial, right? We've talked extensively about it, right? Allows for oppressive themes to exist. It's based in lived experience. It's about telling a story as part of a community, all these things. And then we have this methodology, which is sort of marrying the two, right? So I'll read it out. Convivencia testimonial creates a communal space of shared racialized class and gendered experiences through a vulnerable hermandad where innate themes surface, bringing attention to social injustices. So those two things married. Where in a focus group, the researcher asks direct questions to the participants and a direct answer is given, a convivencia testimonial promotes the sharing of informal stories. Promotes the sharing of informal stories. It is a subaltern method that is not defined by responding to focus group type questions. Instead, it nurtures an experience that has meaning to all parties involved. All right, so that's describing it, how it actually works, sort of giving a visualization of the different elements involved, and then comparing it, contrasting it with the normal focus group or the hegemonic, the status quo focus group, how it mostly happens now. Major themes. So again, we've done the methodology, now let's look at major themes. Convivencia testimonial is unique because its key features distinguish it from traditional focus groups in three ways: researcher positionality, validity of indigenous knowledge, and human collectivity. Each are important to make CVT applicable as a method. They are briefly discussed in the following subsections. So there's subsections that'll talk about those three of them, we'll read them, and then there's just the discussion left. Researcher positionality, what does this mean? Convivencia testimonial researcher positionality has the researcher, okay, so the way this method happens in regards to the position of the researcher is as such. The researcher has the researcher act as a facilitator, engage participants by sharing their lived experiences, and close the discussion with group reflection and contribution of overarching themes they observed. In other words, they are acknowledged as co-creators of knowledge by sharing their own reflective pieces and discussions. By acting as co-creator, researchers do not subjugate their participants into a hierarchical rank. So it's not me asking a question and then taking down the answer, and now I sort of like own that piece of information for my own purposes. It is, let us consider a topic, share stories, consider a theme, try and come up with an idea, a theory together and sort of build, co-construct, create that bit of knowledge. Validity of Indigenous knowledge. So part 2. Social sciences and adult education research are rooted in androcentric, so male-centered, Western research methodologies. The vivencias of the colonized were not justified as viable realities and truths. CVT, on the other hand, validates our Chicana Latina subjective knowledge as our truth and reality. Thus, we become agents of knowledge. Citation there. Our subjugated consciousness is then understood as unique and value-laden in adult educational research. So where historically the subaltern were listened to, this kind of vivencia-centered methodology will validate the kinds of lived truths and the knowledge that people like Rigor Menchu have, but that aren't recognized because they, again, subaltern, don't have access to the power structure. Human collectivity. So the final, as a collective group of hermanas, we share similar experiences, enhanced and identified through the energy created in vulnerable spaces, right? So something about vulnerability is necessary to talk about oppression. Vulnerable spaces are conduits to human connection by humanizing women of color, the focus of this methodology. It also provides empowerment through the sharing of culturally rich space, food, time, and conversations. Human collectivity, which values human connection, fosters a holistic, right, focused on everything, on the whole context, fosters a holistic concept and research strategy. All right, so these 3 things are sort of main and highlighted in this kind of methodology. Human collectivity, valuing indigenous knowledge or validating it, right, as being valuable, and researcher positionality. So like, where is the researcher in this whole situation? At the top, or sort of like trying more to integrate? Discussion. All right, so then it talked about the methodology, it explained a little bit more about it, and now we're looking at some discussion. Convivencia Testimonial is rooted in Chicana Latina feminist research. It can also serve as a new wave of disruptive research in adult education. As more and more colonized researchers enter the field of adult education, whether acknowledged or not, they will search for concepts, methods, and methodologies that do not exist for women of color. Critical research is at its highest need. We must evolve to become innovative in how we conduct adult educational research. Everyone should heed the call to do more research in CRT, LAT-CRIT, and CFE. If we begin with these theoretical underpinnings, it can guide CVT into a methodology to give other women of color researchers the necessary tools needed to transform critical adult educational research into being truly critical, right? So again, that definition of critical that we know. Because more than tools for obtaining data, methodologies are extensions of ways of knowing and being. Thus, they are essential to the way we embody and perform research. So here they're quoting, right? And look at how they sort of end with a quote, with a citation, and they're really making it their own words. They're talking back to why this is important, right? And that's the end of the paper. And here we have the references. All right, so that wasn't too long. 1 second, stop recording. That was a reading of Proposing a New Research Method, Convivencia Testimonial